Well, hey there, welcome to the Up and Comer Show. This is a podcast all about learning how to live a good life. That's what we do each and every week here, and we believe that takes having intention in the tension, because life is full of tensions. And actually, speaking of those life tensions, I'm joined by my brother Adam in Valdese, and he's holding a Harley up to the camera right now that you can't see. It's a pretty nice trinket-sized black Harley that he is showing off right now to me and me alone.
Are you getting the 360 of this?
I am. No, it's great. Maybe we should do a video podcast, but that actually highlights a great point that we are now on YouTube. So if you want to check out the video side, we do have a YouTube channel up and running. So check us out, the Up and Comer Show on YouTube. All of our episodes 80 and on are going to be on there. And speaking of tension, today is what we're going to be talking about is that tension. We're starting a new series, aren't we, Adam?
We are. We are back. And the thing I like about this bike is it's black. So we are back in black, baby.
Back in black.
Banana. The lag, you're like banana.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
Yes.
Well, we're also
we're back, and I'm excited to do this little series because it sort of is a forcer. It's a forcer for us.
Yes.
To force us.
A forcer multiplier.
Right. Exactly. One of them deals to make us put our minds to paper a little bit, or at least give us some structure to our thoughts about tensions, because our new sort of mantra, if you want to say it, is about tensions. And I always like to have like a list of things to back up that mantra. So, I hope as this series unfolds, we have a good group of, topics and thoughts that we've put on paper. I mean, I guess this is not on paper, but maybe we get some transcribers involved. Just hire, I'm sure something on Alibaba or something that would help us with that, and get us some words on paper to later put this all together in a big tome, a life work.
Yeah,
kind of
the life work of Thane and Adam. It's gonna be expansive. It's gonna be weedy. It's gonna be in the weeds and
very weedy. Yep, and very forcey.
Yeah.
A lot of forcing.
We're off to a hot start today. But before we get into it, just a couple reminders. Leave us a rating and review if you haven't. We've got, I think, well over 50 now, 5 stars. So. Add to the cohort. Adam is, I can't even do this. Adam is pulling wheelies on this little motorcycle right now. Oh, it's bad.
Dragon tail, baby.
It's bad. Leave us a rating review. We'll read it on air if you write up something funny or something nice or just something real. We like real too. And if you haven't shared this podcast with a friend, that'd be a sweet way to support us. Send a couple episodes to people that you think could benefit from it. And you can always send us an email, theupandcomershow@gmail.com, or find us on all the socials at upandcomersshow. All right, enough of that housekeeping. And as you can tell, speaking of tensions, I think this is a really fitting topic for us today, because I am very nasally, as you might hear. That means I've been a little sick and under the weather. And Adam was hacking a lung earlier, partly because he's been a little sick and under the weather too, which is ironic because today we're talking about the balance between work and rest. And
I think we need a little more rest, but we never get enough of either.
We don't. No, it's like both buckets are seemingly never full enough. But I tend to struggle the most with the rest bucket, to be honest with you. And I think you probably do too. And I honestly think probably most people listening to this podcast and most people in America do struggle with that same very one, which is kind of, I think there's such a cultural aspect to this. But I'm curious for you, Adam, why do you think rest is so hard?
I think because, we're so trained to live on momentum that we're afraid of losing that momentum. At least, especially I am, being more in a sales role. For number one, I would say also, I mean, I think you can attest to this as well, that there's a sort of fear that comes maybe of missing out, but also just of the unknown, allowing the unknown in, and busyness is actually a form of godness, I think, that we inflict on ourselves so that we don't have to face that unknown. We make ourselves busy with what's clearly known in our lives, and then if we leave space and openness to that, we're afraid of what might pop out and ruin our world as we've created it.
Yeah,
I mean, that may be a little deep answer, but
No,
I think that's sort of true for me.
Yeah, and I think, dude, you know, it's been interesting. I've really been noticing lately that I procrastinate and put off so much of the things that I don't know. Like the unknown, you just keep pushing them further and further away because it's easier to just avoid or wait until you have clarity than it is to say, I don't know, or to embrace an unknown and kind of wade into it. Even like in text messages or emails or relationships, whatever it may be, when it's something that is unknown, it's like we tend to just put it off. But it's been interesting just experiencing that. But I think there's something about rest to that too, that because it is, it doesn't necessarily produce something tangible in our. It's almost an unknown in that we think that it won't lead to beneficial products or results or achievements that we can like hang our
it's not
head
measurable. Yeah, and there's a sermon that you sent me that I wish everyone would listen to from Tim Keller on rest. We should put a link in the show notes to that.
Yes.
And what he says is the reason we are afraid of it and we don't rest as much is because of the, what did he say? The eternal inner murmur.
Yes.
And he got that from an article in the New York Times, I think, or the New York Book Review. And he really liked that article and liked that assessment because it strikes on this fundamental principle of humanity that now we have this inner murmur that is constantly telling us we're not good enough or we're not doing enough, or it's that negative drive and force, and we have to constantly override that and prove ourselves different. And he said that's why so many people have achieved so much is through that motivation of proving their legitimacy. And I think the greatest example he gave of that was a runner in the same group as Eric Liddell back in the day. And Eric Liddell, he decided to not run on Sunday and choose to rest. But one of his competitors, they asked him, why do you run? And he says, in 10 seconds, I have 10 seconds to legitimize myself. I have 10 seconds to prove my legitimacy. And his point was in the 100-meter dash or whatever, that that's it. He could do it in 10 seconds, and that's all he was there for. And I connected with that. Man, personally, my relationship with work and rest is in and out in a really crazy way. This is not a small thing for me. This is one of the highlighting principles of my life that's defined me. And in the past, when I heard that sermon from Keller, it let me see my past in a new light. And I was able to see that back in the day when I was racing on a bicycle or training for piano, there was disciplines I was, even college and studying there were disciplines I applied myself to that I just went way overboard with how much work I put in, and I overworked myself extremely to the point that in cycling I was overtrained chronically, and I think it led to a lot of health conditions I have now, and at least allowed them to happen. So, for me, I'm very invested in that, where I was unable to rest because spiritually I was not at peace with God at the time. And so I think there's a spiritual component to all of this for sure, because resting inevitably is a spiritual exercise. If you don't have peace with God, you fill your time up because you don't have peace with God, because you're running from Him. And that's what I was doing without knowing. And Keller basically said, we were made for more than that. We were made to achieve rest, to enjoy the rest of God. And he references Hebrews 4 and 7 about that issue and how, we are supposed to enter the rest of Christ. Not just rest, but the rest of Christ. And I think the reason it's Christ's rest is because only He can rest 100%. Only He has achieved perfectly what he was supposed to achieve. Now, all of our achieving is done in light of that. We're free to achieve less than 100% because we can't. We're imperfect people. And Christ is not wanting us to do that. So God's not calling us just to sit back and rest more. He's calling us to rest as a pervasive life mantra within and work within that context, realizing that now we are resting in the completed work of Christ, and now all we're doing is adding flourishes on top of that,
Yeah, and I think one thing that you hit on there that was really good is even like the different aspects of rest. It's not just physical, it's also spiritual, it's also emotional. I think and even mental. Like I think you can even add in a mental component, So like there's many layers to it, and it's not just a binary type term or way to think about it. It's multifaceted for sure. And I think that each of us struggle with certain areas of that, different, I guess, realms of that more than others. I think it's just important, though, to realize that there are different ways that we rest, and there's different needs that we have for rest in that. And I know that the one we always default to think about is the physical, but really, like you said, the spiritual or the emotional, those are often more important, or if not just as important. And that Keller, man, the thing that word that he called it is self-reproach, right? That self-reproach saying that I'm not good enough until X, Y, or Z. And that's something that we all face. We all have that voice telling us we're not good enough. We haven't arrived. And that's a half truth, right? So some of that is true that we haven't arrived. That's a good thing, but it's only half truth because there's a point where we have to release a self-dependence and rely back on a God dependence, kind of like you were mentioning. But I guess the question I was curious about is, where do you feel or experience the most pressure for this? Is it external, internal? Where are those voices coming from, or where does this pressure for you come from, to turn a blind eye to rest, I think?
Yeah, I think it's genetic partly because I think, like we're all either sort of different types of people, and I'm definitely type A, and my wife laughs at me because I'm very similar to her dad in that way, that we both are really driven and a little bit ADD when we sit still, and he hates to sit still. So it's funny that, I'm similar in that way, but I also have read a lot of books because of God forcing me to sit still. And now I'm trying to find a balance to that myself. So a lot of that pressure comes from my personal thing of just being split personality. It's like, on one hand, I'm very driven. I want to get a lot of stuff done. And on the other hand, I want to sit still, and I value that. And there's a part of me that I'm really overjoyed when I do, and I'm like, man, I can't get enough of this. But then I go back to the other personality, and it's like I have to be either or. I can't be both in the same day at the same time. And Keller even mentioned in his sermon how we need to add in periods of rest during our workday, find those periods and times to just take a break in some way. And I don't really do that. Because I'm terrible at that. Like I said, I think my problem is I'm so goal oriented that I can't stop myself from achieving it sooner rather than later in order just to rest. I see that as a barrier.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. And it also is, I think, it's definitely counterintuitive in a lot of ways, because it's saying no to the work now and the task now to say yes to better work and better tasks later. But in the moment, it never feels like that. And I think that's always the thing that's the self-discipline of preaching that truth to ourselves in the moment, to where we can say yes to that, even if we don't feel like, because most of the time we don't feel like it. But I do think that, honestly, some of the biggest voices is just culture. I mean, the culture around us is so pervasive on achievement that until we have intentionality around resting, it's, especially like for me in a place like LA, it is such a bad place for rest. Partly because there's so many more demands. There's an endless amount of demand on you, not only because everything's more expensive, but also because everything takes more time and there's more people doing all of those things, to where the demand is so high. that you feel it's even ramped up. But it's the same, I think, all throughout America, is just this pressure to of comparison, of achievement, and of finding our identity in what we do and what we accomplish instead of who we are. And I think, man, those are really powerful pressures that I know I feel a lot, especially here in LA.
Definitely, yeah. I was going to ask you too about, where in your life do you think you had the best balance of that, and where do you think it came from?
Yeah. So a couple weeks ago, actually, I had one of the best balances, mainly because God forced me to. I ended up pulling a muscle in my neck and back, and it was partly because I was just burning the candle and trying to do too much, and I think it was God's way of just kind of slapping me lovingly. And so I took a week off from working out, and I really prioritized a week long of rest, like really sleeping more, really being slower in my work and in my output. And it was such a blessing. Like, I really physically, tangibly experienced a blessing from that. But then, like, even with that, this last week, I get back into all the things, and lo and behold, I drive myself into a hole again and get sick this last weekend, So it's so funny. I feel like a little child sometimes, because you taste and see that it's good, and then you go right back to the old ways. And it's really humbling in that, What about you on the flip end? When are you most out of balance?
I'm most out of balance when I'm obsessing about something. And I think that obsession is what I have to fight. I'm type A, but more than that, I don't even know what type this is. It just is that I'm very obsessive. So, for example, if I'm at work and I get on a roll or I get some opportunity, it's like I want to stay at work until I'm done, whether it takes me a week or two. I don't go home. I don't sleep. I don't eat. I'm cool, And in the same way at home, more likely a project kind of overwhelms me and I want to get it done. It literally can be as simple as researching campers to buy, because it's a big decision and I want to mess that up. I want to strap myself to some camper that's terrible. And I need to do all this due diligence. I need to make sure. I need to double check and triple check. And I need to do all this research and come up with this analysis scale so I can figure out, what's good for all of them, what's bad, pros and cons, and all this. And I think I'm sort of chilling out doing that, but there's so much brain activity involved and so much soul-sucking attention that I'm almost scared now to do that kind of stuff. I'm afraid of getting down the rabbit hole of researching some idea or thing that I'm about to strap myself to, whether it be thinking too deeply about what I'm teaching for Sunday school, because that may obsess me, or getting too deeply into something I'm buying or something I'm doing and building at the house or at work. It's almost like I have to keep myself at arm's distance a little bit to some things because I'm afraid they'll overtake me. Because my past is so bad. I have a track record of not being able to keep a healthy balance when I'm in the heat of the moment. And I think that's what I aspire to, is that going forward, I'm able to dive into the heat of the moment and then set an alarm. 30 minutes later, I've got to stop reading this issue or whatever and stick to it and move on. Yeah. Even if it's a self-imposed timeline, impose it, because it helps you keep a balance. Totally. And that's something that nobody really does that I know, So that's why I just hadn't done it.
And it's that's the intentionality, right? And that's the first step is always like recognizing, and then it's understanding, and then it's optimizing. And so recognizing is seeing it, understanding it is really putting those two arms, or that arm's length out, and being like, okay, like I'm not gonna fall into this trap. But then optimizing is being able to dive into it, but come out of it better on the other side. And it's so true. Like I think for me, that's even with things like the Sabbath and practicing a Sabbath with having a different, it's just like understanding that like I've experienced the benefit from it, and I know the tangible fruit of it. I know the design in it, and I need to commit to it. And so I've realized now with my schedule that I won't make that happen until I dedicate a day before the week even begins, because it's so chaotic and there's so many things going on, and I'm wearing a lot of different hats to where if I don't pick a day before and just be resolute in that decision, it's not going to happen. It doesn't happen. So I'm working on getting better at that, but it still takes a lot of discipline, like you're saying. But what do you think are the rhythms that help you consistently like have intention in that tension and find balance or prioritize rest well? What are those daily, weekly, monthly? What are the rhythms that help you?
Yeah, it all comes down to accountability, and reviews. So for me, I just need to force myself at the end of every day to review the day. And typically I don't do that because it hurts. I review the day and I'm like, I sucked that like 8 times over, but you need to do it and you need to face that fear and review the day and go, where did I fail in this way? Where can I be better? And realize that most of the world doesn't even involve themselves at that level of self-analysis, so you're already ahead doing it. And just do the process and trust the process of reviewing, and then keep yourself accountable by involving someone else in the conversation. I would recommend it not be your spouse or your boss. I think accountability is better held outside of those two circles, but be open with someone you can be open with, and for me, that means a personal coach. Shout out to Thane Marcus. And it's been incredibly helpful because it gives me a community, even if it's very small, that I can be open with and find insight and also just be accountable to the process. And there's no rocket science. It's just accountability to the process, and the process yields results and has for hundreds of years, I'm sure, so it's just putting yourself in that.
100%. I think there's also some interesting rhythms that I feel like God has just put in place, right? Like the fact that like 1/3 of our time each day should be resting, right? Like we need 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night on average. Like that's just like a clockwork. That's a scientific fact almost. The research shows it everywhere. I think the other is, 6 days on, 1 day off, like that whole the whole form of the Sabbath. I also, the interview that's coming out next week that I did, Allie, she's awesome, so get excited about that. But she talked about sabbaticals, and having her rhythm was kind of like every 7 years or so, having a sabbatical, and I thought that was a pretty good kind of thought process, like every 7 to 10 years. And honestly, that's a pretty good window anyways, because that's kind of the known, or at least the discovered amount of time for pursuing mastery in a field. Robert Greene.
Is she in higher education?
She is not. She's an author, and she's worked a lot in trafficking, and now she's building her own company. So,
cool.
Yeah, but yeah, I think there's something to that, like every 7 to 10 years taking like a 3-month sabbatical where it's just a full detox, and so I think there are some great rhythms that are already seen in creation and in the structure of the world and how God's designed it. And then I think there's also some great, like there's universal ones, there's also individual ones, right? Where like for me, I need to spend at least 1 day a week where I take an hour and just really reconnect to my vision and analyze, like, how am I doing? Like, check in, sit with my pen and paper and just get thoughts out and really see where I'm at. Because if we don't sit with us, we're not going to know us, So that's good. Yeah. And like you, like for me, it's the morning and evening routines that are like foundational to the rest of the day that helps me, I think, maintain a better rhythm throughout the day. And with that, like really prioritizing the amount of sleep I'm getting is just non-negotiable. I mean, I woke up this morning at 4:50, but to do that, I got in bed by 8:30 last night. So old man status. But yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting like structures that we can see and find.
Yeah, and you talked about every 7 years doing something. I mean, so that can be as granular as every moment of the day or every hour, or as big as every 10 years. And I think you have to have, proportional scale there from moment to moment up to that point. And so every week, every Sunday, I think should be a certain rest. If you're a pastor, maybe it's Mondays, or if you're got another problem, maybe it's Saturdays, whatever. But there's one day a week where you focus on resting and reconnecting and getting rejuvenated for the next week. And typically, I've recently just started to really get intentional about that, to say at the end of the week, make sure that my resting is not just haphazard, but intentionally focused so that I am ready to go Monday morning. And something my wife and I talked about, where it's like, why do we just sort of complain throughout the weekend that it's almost over and Sunday's here, all right, and we got to go to work tomorrow? Do you really want to combat that negativity on a Monday morning at 5 a.m. when you got to get up? You want to be prepared for that. So I think we start combating that on Saturday night, and then when Sunday rolls around, we spend all day getting juiced up for the positive things that are coming Monday morning. And I think that's what has been most successful, and probably what the most critical, practical use of rest is in preparing you to work. So if you don't rest with that in mind now, then the rest is almost not worth it. You know what I mean? Because we're not dead yet. I mean, I think one day, there's a day coming when we're in heaven and we'll rest forever. That'll be our lifestyle. But now we still work, we still have the toil, we still sin and have to repent. There's still that rhythm, and I think that rhythm is what forces our rest rhythm to be always focusing on the work rhythm too.
And I think you really made a huge point there, that we need to actually have more focus and more intention with our day of rest than with our days of work. And that's something that's super convicting for me. It's like, man, I don't approach those days with as much focus or intention as my normal work days. And that's totally lopsided. So it's massive. We really need to take some serious intention into those days of rest so that we can, that takes more it's only one day of the week anyways, so it should be extra focus and extra intention into it. It's
right. Yep.
It's a non-negotiable. I also think the other thing, just to mention real quick, is the information overload and the over-connection and stimulation that we have. I mean, those are probably two of the biggest catalysts for busyness and a lack of rest that ultimately leads to, the fruit of that is seen pervasively in the anxiety and also over depressed generation that we have now, or society that we have. And I think there's a really strong correlation between those two things. And it's not a small issue in that light.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
We
need to wind it up.
Yeah. Last question is, when was the last time you felt fully rested?
Oh boy. I think I don't know fully, but more recently than not recently. I think before I got married, it was a crapshoot. I really never did rest much. And then after I got married, to be honest with you, my honeymoon was insane. Yeah. I felt like just getting away for a week and spending time. Now, I was physically tired though, because not because of what you think, because we were so busy adventuring.
Of course.
Even to this day, Faith is talking about how we literally spent 3 hours on the beach the entire week of our honeymoon. And that's her testament of my obsessive type A nature. I cannot sit still, even in our honeymoon, because we were constantly, one day we rented a Harley and rode around, one day we rented another 3-wheeled bike thing, and it was just always something we're exploring. And that's not a bad thing, but even then I wasn't very physically rested. I think for me, the first weekend we took our camper out was pretty hard to beat, because spiritually it was there was that component. Physically it was there, with the camping being like nothing to do in a good way. And then mentally, I'd finally gotten clarity at work to where it was neat and tidy in my mind, and that meant to me I could forget it. When I pull out of the driveway at work, I'm done, till I come back. So it was awesome.
Yeah,
it was definitely rejuvenating.
That's legit. Yeah, for me, it was probably a couple weeks ago on that week of rest on my Sabbath day. It was kind of the combination of those two. I really felt pretty fully rested on all cylinders, which is really cool. And I think for you listening, everyone listening, I think that's an important question to ask yourself is, when was the last time you felt fully rested? Because it's going to surprise you how long ago that probably was. But I think just remembering that experience can help us get back to that place. And that should be more of a consistent reality, not a distant reality. And so hopefully this talk on the tensions of life and the balance between work and rest was helpful for you guys, because it's something that is an ongoing thought process and will be an ongoing discussion between me and Adam for sure. And it's important. It's important to living a good life, as we're all striving to do. And so we're gonna zoom off on this fake Harley that Adam's pulling wheelies on. For the full show notes, go to the upandcomershow.com/episodes/rest. Gosh. The sound effects are back. Back in black. Well, until next time.
Yep.
This has been fun, brother.
Mm-hmm.
We hope you all have an up and coming week.